Well, hello everybody. Welcome. My name is Alex Sanchez. I'm the Senior Marketing Manager at CSCMP, the Council of Supply Chain Management Professionals. And we're very excited today. We have the Softeon friends here with us, and they're very ready and eager to talk about warehousing management system. Basically, that was then, and this is now. What's new with that? And they really have a very engaging presentation. Dan Gilmore is with us. He's Chief Marketing Officer at Softeon, and I'm going to turn over to him in a second. But before, I want to make a couple of housekeeping announcements. First of all, everybody is in mute for a much better webinar experience. However, we want to make this interactive as possible. So if you have questions, please make sure to ask those questions at any time using the question box of the GoToWebinar control panel. We'll have a Q&A at the end, and then I'll make sure to address as many questions as we can within the time frame that we have. Also, there's a chat section in case that there's a comment that needs to be made. I'll be monitoring that as well. But the question section is really where most of the action will be happening in terms of Q&A. We will be recording this and we'll be sending a replay within 24 hours to all registrants. So if you have a friend that registered but couldn't make it, they'll be getting the video as well. With that being said, I think this is all I have on my side. So welcome again, and I'm going to turn it over to Dan.
Great, Alex. Thank you so much. Pleased to be here, you guys. I think we got some fun stuff to talk about here. Again, I'm Dan Gilmore, Chief Marketing Officer at Softeon. We're a supply chain software company. I'll give a brief introduction in just a second to that. But many of you will also know me as my longtime role in writing the First Thoughts column in the Supply Chain Digest magazine weekly column. I get around quite a bit on the speaking tour. Some of you may have seen me then and there. So anyways, a very pleasure to have you present with us today. There's a lot happening right now. We really are at an inflection point, I think, in warehouse management systems. That's what we're going to cover today. We got a lot of ground to pass over, so I'm going to go at a fairly brisk pace. Hopefully that will be okay, but I think I've got some real interesting stuff to share in terms of where the technology in WMS is headed. And as Alex said, you can ask questions at any time. If there's a lot of questions, I won't be able to get to all of them on air here, but I will try to respond via email for any that we did not get. So just a real quick introduction to Softeon, supply chain software company. Really kind of go to market with three main product areas. One is warehouse management, and you see that over on the right-hand side there, and all the stuff that goes with it, yard management, labor and resource planning, plotting optimization, et cetera, et cetera. More recently, there on the kind of middle left is the warehouse execution systems. We're going to actually talk about that today. Really, really exciting development in what's happening in warehouse software, game-changing, really. And I'll cover that in a little bit because it's really one of the main areas of what's happening different and new out there right now. And then something called distributed order management. You may have heard of it, which kind of decides what's the best way to source orders and omni-channel retail and far beyond that as well. Then we have a bunch of other stuff that goes around that, but all kind of on a single platform. And just some idea, again, who our customers are, folks like UPS Supply Chain Solutions and Do It Best Hardware, Lenovo, the computer folks, Duluth Trading Company in there, Famous Underwear, Sony, OptumRx, big pharmacy benefits manager of United Healthcare, Suncast, et cetera, Dunzo, big auto parts manufacturer. So just the usual kind of logo slides. We're very big in the 3PL market, as you can see there as well. So big assortment of customers across verticals, and from very large companies, money billions of dollars. Casey's General Stores, the convenience store chain in the Midwest. I see down there on the left. But also many mid-sized companies as well. So just to give you some sense of who it is that's talking with you here today, I wanted to just take a couple of slides and a couple of seconds to do that. So one of the really interesting things, most people trace the start of the first real-time WMS. That means that WMS had wireless, mobile computers on it, RF terminals, back to 1975. So we're like 45 years into it. Yet, for as mature as it is, the category kind of keeps reinventing itself and still is seeing, very strong market demand. And why is that? I'm not going to go through all of these reasons, but obviously, anytime you have a new facility, it almost it's a new opportunity to decide whether you're going to keep the incumbent or WMS or you're going to go to something new, especially if you're making major changes like a lot of automation. Kind of an inflection point there as well. And just you see some of the other sort of things down there, companies that are experiencing rapid growth, they just can't keep up with the volumes anymore. Big strategy changes in logistics. Certainly e-commerce, e-fulfillment, direct consumer, whatever you want to call it, is driving a lot of activity, both in terms of automation, new facilities, and new WMS software. A lot of people just have really, really old software. I was just working with a company just last week that still is running a mainframe WMS. Unbelievable. Didn't know there was that many left still out there looking to do something new. So, all these things. And in cloud, we're going to talk the bottom bullet point there. We're going to talk about cloud a little bit here because that really is changing the game a little bit as well. So all these things are combining to make the WMS market still pretty robust 45 years after the first one was implemented. But, I'm going to argue a little bit that 20 years, or so, a couple of decades since 2000-ish or so, there's only been kind of incremental improvements in WMS capabilities. There's been a lot of stuff around it, TMS and plotting and some of the things I talked about there. But, I came across over the Christmas break as I was cleaning my office up, a 2003 RFP from Conagra Foods, and I started looking through it and said, it doesn't look all that different today than it, then than it did today than it did 20 years ago. Some of the things are more packaged, obviously less customization, all those things. But I would argue that the progress in the space has been somewhat incremental. And I think now we're on the gauge of something that's more of a step change type changes, improvements. And I think the market really is ready for something new. And, I don't have all the answers here, but I'm talking about some things that I think are really exciting. I've been around this business for a long, long time. I've been involved in implementing WMSs, marketing WMSs, writing about WMSs, speaking about WMSs, and many other things. And I'm really excited about what's happening right now, and I think you are too. I think we're out on the other end of this with something very different. So I got 5 things I'm kind of tracking here. I could have added 2 or 3 more, but one is the kind of the change. Well, that was then, this is now. What's changing? Certainly the movement from on-premise to cloud deployment. We'll talk about that. From traditional WMS configuration and a lot of time and pain in some cases, and implement WMS to a smarter way to do that with some enabling technology. From very difficult integration with materials handling systems to more of a plug-and-play type model that's got some big benefits. As I mentioned at the beginning, from WMS alone to WMS plus warehouse execution, that's the game changer I really want to focus on. And then from kind of, the screen-oriented interfaces to kind of new age, more voice interfaces. A couple, 3 more I could have added, but in the interest of time, I thought I'd go with these as the most important to talk about today. So let's talk about number 1, from on-premise to cloud. WMS was a little bit late in moving to cloud deployment, and that was, largely due to concerns about, latency and other kind of, issues in terms of, all the real-time sub-second response you need for RF devices, voice devices, materials handling systems, et cetera. I think some of those concerns were legitimate. Some of them may be a little bit overblown, but they're kind of fading away now, and we'll get to that in just a second. One of the things that certainly is emerging is, the performance of a WMS on the cloud very much is tied to its architecture. So if it's architected for cloud delivery and packet optimization and all the kind of stuff that goes on there, the performance can be just fine. If it's, architected for a different era and you try to move it to the cloud, there may be some issues there. But certainly we're seeing many benefits, not only, here in WMS, but, the kind of general benefits of cloud deployment. Certainly faster, implementation times. You can spin this thing up, much quicker. Just as importantly, more rapid time to value. You can allow the vendor, to manage the system for you, so you really much more easily than if it's on-premise. So you can have much, less internal staff support required. Hey, you close down one facility, open another. It's very easy to port, the license or the subscription or whatever to different places. You hopefully can use one DC and one WMS in one hosted instance of the server to handle multiple distribution sites, the big complex DCs, medium level DCs, maybe some smaller remote DCs, et cetera, and be able to do that on one platform, one stack, one instance of the software. And we're really finding, maybe this, maybe surprising, but we're just finding that the customer satisfaction from cloud deployment is much higher. Everything just works. We can take care of all the management, easy updates, all those kind of things. And so that we really push that because we're finding the satisfaction of customers is so great. But having said that, there's still some confusion out there in terms of what companies really want. And I've used this for many years, actually, this little model, and I still find it handy. I often wind up just drawing it on a whiteboard or something if I'm in the company's office here. But really, you got to think about that when you're thinking cloud, or we're interested in cloud or not interested, there's kind of 2 main axes, if you will. There's the deployment model. Is the software going to be installed on-premise, or is it going to be a cloud-type deployment? And then the pricing model, is it going to be a traditional license type arrangement where you pay for the license up front, usually then pay annual maintenance on that over time? Or is it going to be more of a monthly or quarterly fee based on some kind of subscription or transactional type of pricing mechanism? So that's kind of the basic framework. And, the traditional model, lower left-hand corner, of course, was, on-premise deployment and upfront license payment. And there's certainly still some of that out there. Kind of the emerging paradigm is the upper right, which is cloud deployment with that subscription or transaction pricing model. But recognize, there could be hybrids. You could do an on-premise deployment, but do a subscription transactional pricing model. You could do a cloud deployment with an upfront licensing model. We've done some of those. So it really just, kind of depends on what it is you're really trying to achieve, and understanding what it is that's important to you in terms of figuring out where in this, quadrant that you really want to be for your deployment. And, there's another third dimension actually, and that's the application management model. You want to manage the application. That's typically what's done if it's an on-premise deployment where you get the database and maintain that and the app servers and all the rest of it that goes on in the server operating somewhere within your enterprise. Or it's so easy in the cloud to let the vendor to manage that for you as part of the subscription pricing. Takes a lot of headaches away, very responsive, all that, manage uptime, all those kind of things. So you really got those three dimensions, and it's just up to you to think through with your IT staff, where really you want to be and why, and make sure you understand that going in. So hopefully that made some sense, and I found it kind of provides a nice framework for folks to think about that. But make no mistake, clearly this is where the industry is heading. The concerns about latency turn out to be very overblown, enormously overblown. Dozens of implementations in cloud across, a wide variety of sophistication and complexity, including advanced materials handling systems, is finding this performance in the cloud is really an issue. If it is needed, which we thought might be needed more, but as in practice turns out to be needed very rarely, it is possible, as you see here, to deploy kind of what we call a local agent. You see there on the, kind of interfacing with a pick-to-light system there on the left, and, heavy barcode printing maybe, or scanning. I guess it's printing there. Some of this label printing, actually, extreme label printing actually is quite a tax on the system. But anyways, if it's needed, you can have everything in the cloud except some little, server in the facility that we call, again, an agent that just handles this very time-sensitive stuff, but we're finding it very, very rarely needed. We put it in a couple places in Latin America where the infrastructure was very poor, but in general, cloud performance is just fine. And, there's still, some on-premise vestiges out there and whatever, and certainly it's still an option for many, but in the end, all the software is going to be delivered in the cloud. I don't know if that's 3 years from now or 5 years from now or 10 years from now, but in the end, it's pretty much just the way things are going. And so many, many advantages. And again, we talked about that customer satisfaction. So hopefully that helps you think about that a little bit in terms of one of the major trends we're seeing. The second trend I want to talk about here is from traditional WMS configuration to greater use of templates and things like wizards to transform how WMSs are deployed. Let's face it, 45 years later, too often WMS deployments remain too hard, too costly, too risky, take too long, too much pain. We've all been there. Why is that? I'm not 100% sure, but there's two, again, kind of main issues. One of which is how long does it take to deploy it initially? Is that 4 months or 6 months or 9 months or 12 months? Or how long from the project start to it gets ready to go? And the second, once you turn it on, how fast can you get time to value? How fast can you get back to that starting point you had and exceed it and start driving the productivity gains? These are two separate but related issues, obviously. In many cases, it's taken too long. It's taken too long to deploy, taken too long to achieve that value. And so the question is there a better way? A number of WMS providers have tried the building of templates and things in the past, and I'm not quite sure why, but they all seem to have kind of fizzled out. But I think the time is now where that more templatized and a new aspect to it, a wizardized type approach, really can address some of these issues in terms of deployment times and the time to value and rolling out additional facilities. And if you do it right, not only can this kind of approach reduce the effort and the cost, but it also can be used to prevent mistakes and misconfigurations, and that helps to drive that time to value, to reduce that time to value through the use of these kind of tools. So just to give you some kind of notion of this, you typically, some, well, like ourselves, we have templates for various sectors, consumer goods, food, beverage, retail, e-commerce, industrial, high tech, whatever it happens to be. And you develop, and for your company, it could be a template just for yours. So we're actually working with one large company that has kind of two styles of distribution centers based on line of business. We would develop a template for each of those two lines of business. And then for subsequent facilities, you would then, if you will, select, as you kind of see here, which of those configuration elements, which of those functional elements do you want to include from the template in the new DC you're talking about here. And it's as simple as easy as click and submit. And now all of a sudden you spun up a new distribution center system from the template, and you're ready now to start dealing with anything that may be different from those facilities into the from the template. And here's this kind of wizard process. It's almost like a TurboTax style ability where the system is asking you a series of questions. Not only is it guiding you through the process, letting you know what's been done and what hasn't been done, but it also is going to prevent mistakes. So if you put one configuration choice here and one that contradicts that in another place, it's going to warn you and prevent you from doing that. And that's been one of the real problems with WMS, is that lack of sort of awareness across configurations of when things are actually confounding each other. So this really approach, whether it's the initial implementation or whether especially for multi-site rollout, to have these kind of tools, I think is going to fund, and they're going to continue to get better. Is going to continually continue to change the paradigm of how we implement WMS, reduce a lot of the pain and the time that we've seen, and get those deployments done faster, get more time to value, and frankly put more self-sufficiency in the hands of customers rather than having to rely on the vendor. So very, very cool stuff there in terms of that. And think about that. I mean, why shouldn't it be like a TurboTax implementation? Of course it should be something like that. Maybe a slightly different paradigm, but something along those lines, something I think is really going to add a lot of value to the marketplace. So number 3, moving from kind of very difficult and time-consuming MHE integration to more of a plug-and-play model. So obviously there's a lot of interest in MHE. They're all ready before the virus, but labor shortages and challenges. Now the virus, robots don't get infected. So there's a variety of interest in MEG, and that's some very high levels of automation, almost completely automated facilities, to the more mid-level automation, things like voice. It's not only MEG, but it's in the mix. Smart carts, pick-to-light, put walls, very popular in e-commerce and beyond. Mobile robots, certainly, I'm convinced everyone's going to have mobile robots in the next 3 to 5 years or so, at least some kind or another. But the approach kind of is limited. Now each of these systems that I'll talk about in a second has their own software. You have to kind of throw the orders over the wall to these systems that I referenced up there, and you receive the confirmations back, and the subsystem does all the work. There's some issues with that, which I'll talk about in a second. You see some of them here, limits flexibility. I'll get to that in just a minute. And it just, the implementation of these systems just takes too much time. Why does it take 6 months to implement a pick-to-light system? It's just too long. So some better ways, I think, have started to emerge. And, one of the ways, we're thinking about it here is that, right now, each of these subsystems, as I indicated, has its own logic. And so then their own software that comes with it. And so you can't really optimize the entire process there, because each slice of a silo there has its own little world. So you wind up with, fairly high cost hardware for things like footwalls and stuff, when it really should be kind of commodity hardware. You can't really optimize the full end-to-end picking process, because the subsystems just have a limited amount of information that they can really deal with. And I'm going to take you there, an example of that here in just a second. And those silos and limits flexibility. And a key area of that is, for example, of mobile robots. If you use the software from the mobile robot provider, what happens if a better robot comes along next year or 3 years from now or whatever, or you have different needs for carriage capacity or shelf types or whatever that happens to be? You really want to be able to have all robots from multiple manufacturers operating in the same environment. You want to add some new ones from a new vendor because they got a better price or a better performance or whatever. Well, you add them into the mix you've got, and all of those can be managed under one system. That's just going to provide long-term flexibility versus kind of locking you in there. So we think the better approach is to have, direct, kind of real-time integration at the API level with these kind of systems, and get rid of that third-party software, and just let the WMS take care of it, and put it all then in one platform, one visible executable platform. And I'm going to walk you through an example. I realize I'm going at a brisk pace here, but I'm going to walk you through just an example of how that plays out, of why it's so important to have the WMS interacting with these picking systems and not have them siloed, as we talked about before. So just imagine I'm going to go through a common scenario of a shortage on a pick. So we got a forward pick area. There's our picker here. And the first thing that happens when he arrives at that forward pick location, for whatever reason, the inventory that's expected for an order, let's say he's doing cluster picking to cart, and the inventory, there's supposed to be 4 there, and there's only 2. So he picks 2, puts it in the appropriate totes on the cart, but 2 are not there that the system, the WMS, was expecting, and hence he or she can't complete that order. So you got a couple of choices there, right? I'm not going to go through all the complexities, but you can either just skip that pick and short it, or you can say, okay, or you can short it, or you can skip it and say we're going to catch it up with it back at the end of the process and try to find that missing SKU. So that's the first step that likely happen. So what should happen there? Well, what should happen is the system should then generate an immediate cycle count. So our cycle count comes over. He or she is going to confirm the shortage. We thought there was supposed to be 2 left. There's a 0 there at this point. So not only are they going to do the cycle count and confirm the shortage, that's going to generate a high priority replenishment task because we need those SKUs for this order. So you see now already that we're now bringing in WMS functionality, just cycle counting, replenishment, etc. That if this is just managed by the picking software, the software itself, it would say with the put wall system or whatever, you're not going to be able to address the problem holistically. So let's look at how this could work with a mobile robot. So our worker, picker 1 over there, is going to continue to do the remaining picks, but with 2 of the items shorted, as we've just talked about, and he or she is going to take that carton or tote to what's often called a hospital zone, awaiting replenishment. Now, in normal systems, this is really just kind of a very difficult process managing these exceptions. You got to send somebody out and figure out where the inventory is and all of that kind of stuff. But we're going to have a different approach after our picker has dropped off his or her totes to the hospital area. All the good ones to the packing area, the missing 2 to the hospital zone area. So we've now next are going to go ahead, as we indicated, generated an emergency replenishment and replenished that forward pick location. But now we're going to send a mobile robot out, okay? And so we have another picker. This is picker 2. And what's going to happen is the system is going to know that picker is approaching or going to approach a location near the forward pick area where we had the shortage and we've now replenished. And so what's going to happen is the mobile robot is going to meet that picker, the second picker there, and that picker, in addition to the picks he's getting for his cart, is going to get another task assigned to him. It says, take 2 of these and put it on the mobile robot. We call this the new task interleaving. And so in addition to the task he's got for the cart he's moving, he's going to be directed to put a couple more items on the mobile robot. The mobile robot then is going to move itself, perhaps with some other shortages on it as well, but move itself over to the hospital zone. It delivers it to the area where the 2 cartons were missing orders. Those orders are now picked off the robot, put into the cart, packed, sealed, and shipped. And voila, you've taken a problem which is very difficult for many companies to handle, and done so very smoothly and very slickly through the use of mobile robots and integration of the robot software with the WMS. And this is really, I think the message I'm trying to deliver in terms of an integrated platform that allows you to combine all the information that's available to make the smartest decisions. Okay? Hopefully that made some sense. Now, this is the area I'm probably most excited about, trend number 4, which is from WMS alone to WMS plus WES. WES is a big topic. We could do a whole, session on that by itself. But what is happening now is WES. I'm going to go through the history a little bit. But it's moved beyond applications that only involve, heavily automated DCs, which is kind of how it started out. And to the point where we're also seeing now the rise of what you might call the warehouse management and execution system. I'm going to go through this in a little bit more detail in just a second there. But, the WES is going to provide simulation, optimization, and order orchestration capabilities, really that are kind of beyond what any current WMSs do today. It really is that step change I'm talking about there. And it's moving us down the path of what can be called Gartner calls the autonomous WMS, or the autonomous warehouse system, that is making so many more decisions on its own without the need for human intervention. So I'm going to give you a little sense of how we got here. You know, you may have heard of the term WCS. Let's add another acronym to the mix, a warehouse control system. But in my view, in the view of many, you know, the WMS should really be the brains, and the WCS should be sort of just the executor of what the WMS has decided is the best decision. But sometimes it doesn't work out that way. Sometimes the WCS gets some intelligence, and you know, why does that happen? Well, sometimes when some automation is going in, the WMS is just not capable of doing some of the things that the system is needed, and the materials handling vendor or WCS vendor says, hey, we can do that in the WCS, and so you wind up getting some smarts there. Sometimes the big, large materials handling vendors are kind of, you know, in control of the customer, the scenario, if you will, and they'd like to add more value, so they're going to kind of push for WCS to add more smarts, and sometimes they do that. And frankly, sometimes, you know, the WMS vendor and the WCS vendor sort of get together on the side and decide who's going to do what. And sometimes the path of least resistance is for the WCS vendor to just have some of the logic as well, even though I don't think that's usually the right choice. But nonetheless, all these things can happen so we get smarts in the WMS and the WCS. We think it should all be in the WMS. But now you had a new kind of phenomenon come around a few years back, which is the rise of the WES. And the WES thinking, for those that first promulgated it, the WCS is back to just doing sort of the execution. The WMS might be relegated to kind of inbound in terms of receiving, put away storage, inventory system of record, et cetera. And now the fulfillment smarts kind of go into WES. And this is why this is also, you know, really important what's going on, here. You know, the WES was really developed initially due to perceived shortcomings in the WMS market in terms of handling automation, that there was not adequately factoring that into its processing and thinking in terms of how orders should be released, and that led to big peaks and valleys on things like sortation equipment, which was absolutely true for many WMS companies. Also kind of addressed the problems of visibility to what was going on across, you know, complicated facilities in terms of different processes or work areas. And it kind of spawned this notion of waveless picking, where kind of decisions are made kind of in real time based on what's happening right now and where workers are and where the orders are, et cetera. And so all of that's good, but was kind of limited, again, as I talked about, to just heavily automated systems. So what is happening now is that WES is kind of continuing to expand, and some of this I talked about, but, you know, really, you know, addressing these issues, the lack of, you know, real visibility to order throughput, net execution, and real time, and dashboards and monitors and all that's happening there. Labor planning challenges in terms of getting the right resources in the right place at the right time. There's still a lot of optimization that can be done in terms of picking execution, even above and beyond advanced WMSs. Many places there's a lot of chaos and kind of panic around meeting carrier cutoff times and things like that. And so how do you hit those, you know, those SLAs consistently and without, you know, the kind of the panic that occurs? Chaos is maybe the better word at the end of the time. That equipment utilization we just talked about there, and again, as I said, we found that the WMSs, even advanced WMSs, very sophisticated systems, very sophisticated customers, still have quite a bit of reliance on human decision making to keep that work flowing out to the floor and out the door. So what is the fundamental new WES value proposition? You know, it enables companies with the optimization and orchestration I talked about for companies to meet customer demand and service commitments at least possible cost. Yes, I say least possible cost. Now, what that doesn't mean is doesn't mean there could be a way to automate something that's not automated now and drive a lower cost or whatever. No, that's not what I mean. What I mean is for this moment now, today, for this decision about how this order is going to get fulfilled, from where, by what technique, with what timing. Right now, the best decision is this, to meet the service level at the least possible operating cost. That's what I'm talking about. And that's the kind of smarts that are now in WES that really were, you know, not kind of built into WMS, even the best systems on the marketplace there. And I think this is really important. WES can really help to shrink the gap between what I'll call the theoretic throughput of a distribution center, you know, what on paper it should do, and the realized distribution centers. I've been on the phone with a couple of companies in recent weeks that have footwall systems, and they're not turning those cubby holes. Hopefully you all know what a footwall system is, but you know, they're not turning the cubby holes of those footwall systems nearly rapidly enough, and hence they're not getting the throughput. They're not getting the fulfillment rates that they anticipated. WES can help close that gap. Maybe you're never going to get there completely, but certainly minimize that gap. Provides a single system for management control across the distribution center. It can be integrated with the WMS for a complete solution. And this is really part of the breakthrough now. WES is not only for highly automated systems, it's for that too, but also for manual or more mid, hybrid, what we call the hybrid DCs or mid levels of the automation. So how does it do that? Kind of the reverse, notion of the problem. It provides that real-time visibility and to bottlenecks and events and throughput. You can configure and optimize, order batching, picking, release, replenishment, do so on an automated basis. The work just flows to the floor. It has that workload balancing. Let me just give you, an example. Let's say you have a put wall system and you've got 3 line items on that put wall order. 2 of them are coming from a carton flow rack, piece pick, and 1 of them is coming from a mezzanine. Well, it turns out that mezzanine takes about 40% longer to get an order picked and transported to the footwall module than it does coming out of the high-speed carton flow rack. Well, that means to get them there so they synchronize at the same time and you can get that cubby hole turnover, you need to release, in effect, it's not exactly this, but close enough, you need to release the line item for an order that's coming from the mezzanine 40% earlier than you release the 2 line items that are coming out of the case pick area, right? That way they're going to come to the put wall in some kind of synchronous fashion there. That's kind of part of what I'm talking about in terms of that workload balancing and considering all these factors. And that automated order release that I was talking about there, where no longer do you have to have wave planners and expediters and replenishment manager doing all this stuff. The system can take all these factors into account: the priority, the carrier cutoff time, the inventory availability, resource availability, all these kind of things, and automatically release the order so you're either, you're balancing the most efficient possible fulfillment, and that usually happens more earlier in the day through the midday, and then gradually transferring over time to more of a service level focus to make sure that all the stuff that needs to get on the right trucks get on the right trucks at the right time. Okay. And so this is what's just so exciting. This is just really brand new stuff here that is really changing the face of WMS, and we'll get to a little bit more of that in just a second. And also, one of the things we're seeing is the use of simulation techniques to plan, replan, and allocate those resources that we talked about are so difficult to manage in the distribution center. So just real quickly to give you some examples, here's an example of a kind of that real-time dashboard I'm talking about here. You're seeing all kinds of information about different, processing centers or areas within the distribution center where they're at. Of course, you can click on those, drill down into all the detail, et cetera. And the key thing is that not only is this information being used to display in dashboards, the WES is using the same information about status and throughput and bottlenecks to make its decisions about order release and resource allocation. So you're getting the benefits of both from that visibility, the dashboard visualization of it, but also the system is leveraging that information to make the smart decision. This, automated order release that I talked about here, you see, what we call a pick route engine, but basically as orders come down, it's going to dynamically understand, what all those factors I just talked about a second ago and route those orders to the right equipment. And this is dynamic, right? So we have a customer, for example, that's using an auto store and it's got a fixed, capacity. So it can handle so many, orders per hour. Well, when you hit that maximum, if you've got an alternative path, you were going to take that order to the auto store is at capacity right now. So I got to find another route for this order if I have one in order for it to be completed in a timely fashion. All this happens very dynamically and with advanced scheduling I talked about there. You see on the right, how long is it going to take me to process that order from piece picking to transport to delivery to packing, et cetera. So I'm factoring all those things in terms of making these kind of decisions. This, again, is just very advanced capabilities. I talked about the simulation just a second ago. This is just a quick chart kind of showing here kind of, it's kind of a made up chart from the data perspective, but kind of simulating out over time what kind of capacity I have versus what kind of resources I have and highlighting, where there's going to be problems. I have some more advanced looks at this, but they're kind of proprietary. So if you want to talk with them, after this event, happy to do that. But some very, very exciting stuff here in terms of use of simulation. So, what are we seeing in terms of, the benefits of this kind of next generation WES? You can get double digits improvements in productivity or more, a significant reduction in supervisory overhead, much better management of overtime through resource allocation I talked about there, closing that gap between the theoretic and the actual. You can quickly and easily, evaluate and deploy, some of those subsystems we talked about there, meet those service commitments with that lack of chaos that I mentioned, and do so consistently. keep your customer satisfaction high, do so at low cost, and as the original WES kind of envisioned, improve that materials handling utilization and manage that throughput and capacity much better. And again, for all kinds of DCs, not just heavily automated. So this might be useful for you to think about, which is the kind of different options here. Now that we have this thing called WES, you could decide that WES is not appropriate for you. In many cases, it may not be, but in some it certainly is. But you could just deploy WMS only. You could, at the time of initial implementation, deploy WES and WMS together as an integrated solution. Perhaps for you, it makes sense to do it in phases. So WMS is deployed to begin with, and as a secondary phase, WES is deployed, whether that's 6 months later or 12 months later or whatever that happens to be. Or a very intriguing option is you deploy WES alone on top of whatever WMS you have in place, whether that's legacy, homegrown, whatever that happens to be. And that can enable you to kind of breathe new life into a distribution center without the need for a complete WMS replacement. So there's probably some permutations of that, but I thought this model is kind of useful in terms of thinking about the kind of different options now that we have this very exciting tool called WES to bring to bear to the marketplace. So, where this is all headed, I got one more, trend, but in terms of WES, we really are at the beginning of this era of the autonomous warehouse software, making decisions by itself and leveraging artificial intelligence and machine learning to do that. And really just advanced focus on, the WES on product and process flow. We're going to be able to reduce and eliminate kind of the flow bottlenecks we have in the dwell time and something we're kind of calling flow distribution, something to think about there, parallels to how we think about constraints and flow in lean manufacturing environment. And just to note here that the UPS Supply Chain Solutions in late April made a big announcement that they were building their smart Warehouse of the Future initiative on Softeon WES. That's readily available out on the internet if you want to go look and find it. And finally, lastly, the kind of the transition from the screen-oriented interface we've had to, a voice interface. The change is happening gradually, but I believe will be profound over time. This means use of voice far beyond just, order picking, which is great for, but well beyond that. And kind of starts with kind of getting, information about metrics and status updates, but it's involving more kind of a full-blown dialogue where for many or for parts of the interaction, the interface will be voice, not a mobile screen or a maybe through a mobile device, but it won't be from looking at a mobile screen or from looking at a desktop screen. So just some examples here, the ability of a worker to say, I need a replenishment for a particular location, or, manager saying, where are we on this last wave, et cetera. These are kind of the new things that are available today, and it's going to get a lot more sophisticated. Obviously, we have things like Siri and what out there. Gartner calls this conversational voice versus being transactional voice. But there's some very, very exciting developments here, and I think for many, this is going to be the way that we, again, interact with our WMS system. So with that, I'm close to wrapping it up here. I know I covered a lot of ground pretty quickly, but I didn't want to keep you too long. We did get a few questions in. I'm going to try to answer a couple of them here. And you can continue to send your questions in. If I don't get to your question today, again, we are going to try to send out email responses. You see my contact information there. We'll note we've started a new Logistics Insights weekly podcast, just 3 or 4 minutes or so, very short, very succinct commentary or discussion of key distribution and WMS issues, available on all the popular podcast sites. Just search for Logistics Insights or Softeon. I'm sure you'll find it. So I'm going to move to just a couple of questions here real quick in the interest of time. One is, you didn't mention anything about Internet of Things, IoT. How does that fit into the mix? That's an interesting question. Obviously, there's a lot of use of IoT outside of the distribution center, and it can provide maybe some demand signals or whatever. One of the ways you might think about IoT is to be able to track workers and equipment like mobile robots in the distribution center. So I gave that kind of replenishment example earlier in the presentation, and how do I know that where the worker is and where the robot is and how I can marry them up? That's one of the things that IoT can certainly provide for you there, and we use kind of a pairing mechanism to make sure, hey, when we give that new task interleaved task to the worker, is it the right worker and the right robot? So we know which worker it's supposed to be, we know which robot it's supposed to be, and there's a synchronization or pairing mechanism when they get together that says, aha, yes, this is the right match, here's the work, and here's the robot you're supposed to give it to. It can also be used to, track a worker, movement over time, and geofencing, even within a distribution center, and pick paths and things like that. So I think, this notion of tracking workers and equipment with IoT is certainly something that's coming along. Let's see what else here. Yeah, so I'm getting kind of a little pushback on this notion that the cloud delivery is suitable for heavily automated environments. I can only tell you we have a number of proof points there, and even without use of the kind of local agents there. So the response times and the latency that we're seeing are just not significant. And again, the proof is in the pudding. So if we couldn't point to examples, then I'd be more reluctant to make that statement. But we have a number of examples where this is the case, and the system tuning and the performance just winds up being better. So I think cloud is where it's going to be, not only for manual environments, but for automated environments as well. And I think that's just going to be the clear trend. How long to implement WES? Well, that of course is a depends. And frankly, it does matter. It's easier to implement WES in a manual facility than it is in heavily automated facilities. Just we've got more things going on that needs to be accounted for. So I would say, in a manual facility, depending on the time frame, but something in the 3-4 month horizon is certainly quite doable. For more complex scenarios, could it get into the 5 to 6 month type scenario, something like that. So it should be somewhat shorter than a full traditional blown WMS, but not trivial depending on the level of complexity in terms of setting all these rules to optimize the performance and the throughput. And let's see, anything else? Is there anything else you didn't mention coming? Okay, so I did kind of talk about simulation, but I did it in kind of the labor planning context, but there's a lot more we believe is coming in terms of simulation, both in terms of what we call strategic, which means doing kind of what if analysis, like what if I started tasking or leaving today that I'm not using today, or what if I started doing cross-docking, or what if I added a footwall module? What would be the impact of that? And then, more what we call tactical simulation, which is, okay, if I assign these resources to these processing areas today, what is the result going to be in terms of throughput and delivery, and being able to analyze that before you actually assign the resources, so you have a high level of confidence of the result is going to be from the decisions that you make. So I think with that, I'm not sure how many other questions. Looks like we got some other questions, but I think I'm going to pass on that for right now and answer them via email. Again, I hope I'm just impressing with you that this is new stuff here. This is exciting stuff after a couple of decades of maybe less exciting stuff. This is a whole new world of WMS. Certainly would enjoy the opportunity to talk with you about it when it is convenient for you. You can see how to reach me there. Would love to have a conversation. So thanks so much. With that, I'm going to wrap it up. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks so much for joining us.